Welcome to another episode of Commercial Property Roadshow. This is Helen Tarrant. Now, I want to spend a little bit of time today and let's talk about COVID, because there's been lots and lots of questions my community have been asking me, my clients have been asking me about COVID and how's that impacting your business and what you should do if you're already a commercial property owner and you're moving forward. Now, we're coming to a time where we've never actually experienced this before. So let's examine how COVID has impacted some of the businesses. So for office space, predominantly it has impacted more than anything else, because at the moment people are not going to office spaces on rotational shifts. A lot of big firms are starting to realize that they don't need perhaps that everyone needs to commute into the city. They don't need such a large space. So what we will see in the next 12 to 24 months is a reshuffle of these office spaces. We're going to see a little bit less inquiry. We're going to see the vacancy rate go up, and those people who are already having tenants that are coming up for renewal, this is a key period for you to be able to be flexible. So you don't want to have a vacancy in the next 12 to 24 months. What you will do is may need to have a cut in your rent. You may need to give your tenant some incentives, but you need to hold on to that tenant. One of the things to consider is looking at ways where you can actually make your bigger space a much smaller space and creating more tenants in that one space, because if you can do that, that means that you have a better chance of being able to downsize your current tenant and getting another tenant, because a lot of the large spaces will downsize to a much smaller space in the next 12 to 24 months. So do everything you can to hold on to your tenant if you are in an office, if you have an office commercial property. Now, if you're looking to buy during COVID, you see, there's never been a better time than when there's a crisis in the market to actually capitalize on that crisis, you see, because there's so many people out there that are scared at the moment. So for you, if you want to be bold, getting into an office space and being able to hold in the long term or being an owner occupier is a great strategy. You see, if your business needs to occupy a property and you think that you could hold it for the next 3 to 5 years, then this is a good time to get into a metro property. See, what's been hit hard is actually Sydney, Melbourne, and to some extent Brisbane properties. They're metro properties. So if you can afford to buy as the value drop, but hold out through the period as it goes through that vacancy and for it to come back, because it will take 3 to 5 years for it to come back, you will be able to reap the rewards of the capital growth in the back end. Now, if you're reaping capital growth in the back end, know that you're not going to get massive cash flow, but ultimately the capital growth in the back end will outweigh the cash flow at the front end, especially for metro property. So Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. So that's if you've got office space. What if you have retail space? Again, one of the keys to retail is there's still a lot of activity out there, but one retail space can become a professional retail space, can be a restaurant, and can also operate for a professional office tenant. So you've got a bit more versatility with retail spaces. And what I've seen during COVID in the last month or so is that there's a lot of actual activity for leasing of retail spaces, although those people who are getting their retail space lease are giving massive good incentives. So I'm talking about 6 months half rent, 3 months rent free, perhaps no outgoings, perhaps helping the tenant with fit out and everything. That's the type of incentives we're talking about when we're talking about tenants and attracting a tenant. Also, be priced in the market, because you may need to take a drop in the rent, but it's better to get a tenant right now than not. Retail potentially could take a good 12 months for it to recover. As people are trying to work out what's happening, whether people are going to eat out at restaurants anymore, whether they need more space because of the social distancing, or whether they're going to whether there's still going to be a coffee culture in certain areas because there's much less office workers going in that area. So just got to make sure the type of tenant you're getting there, you got to really vet your tenant, making sure that you provide a good incentive, making sure the rent is on market, and making sure that you've got a good bond in place should your tenant not work out sometime down the track as well. But again, if you find a property where you can split it into 2, or you can have one with 2 tenancies that can hold you out for the next 3 to 5 years, that is the most secure you can get, because after that, that's when the market will actually come back. But remember, people in a crisis or in a time where they're uncertain, people actually downsize to a smaller space. So if you're at the bottom of the market, so right now you can pick up properties, say, that's $30,000 a year in rental, and you can split it into two, so it becomes $15,000, and the spaces are still pretty good. So I'm talking about either retail or office where you get 50 or 60 square meters. That's still ideal, because people in the crisis, or they're not sure, or their cash flow is not sure, they downsize. And when they downsize, they're looking for smaller spaces. So all the small spaces are traditionally being filled and being quite consistently filled all through crisis mode. So this happened after the GFC, it's happened after the Asian crisis, it's happened at any time where there's been experiencing high levels of vacancy. All of the bottom levels have been filled and been consistently filled, because if you look at it, anyone can really afford $15,000 or $20,000 for a property to give it a go. Starting out, even with good incentives, even if they're not making a huge amount of money, because it doesn't take a lot to make $20,000 in a business. So now we've covered retail. Now, what if you're in warehousing? You must be thinking, well, warehousing, you must be pretty secure right now, because there is a lot of need for warehousing, logistics, people doing online shopping. There's so many things that that warehouse can be flexible with. So it must be really, really good. Yes, warehousing is quite secure at the moment, and it's absolutely one of the areas you should invest in as part of diversification for your portfolio. But also, one of the things you got to realize is that there's a lot of areas that have lots and lots of tilt slab type of small warehouses being built and being sold. So there's going to be an oversupply coming onto the market. So when you are doing research, when you're buying into it, making sure that you have a property that is not going to all of a sudden in the next 6 months or 12 months have another 2 lots that's coming onto the market. When I say 2 batches or 2 lots, there could be batches of 10 or 20 lots of property coming onto the market, because that's going to affect your rentals as well. But look for tenants, always look for tenants right now for 3 years, minimum of 3 years. 2 years will be fine if they're a government tenant and they've got it's tied into their grants. That will help them move forward. They will roll over, especially if you've got community type or if you've got particular type of tenants who are in the employment sector. Those are really also really good tenants. Now, what you don't want is a tenant that's been there on month to month, or they've gone signed for a year, because later on you're going to have to be negotiating rents at a really bad timing. So 2 years minimum if you've got a government tenant or an employment agency or community centre, because it's tied into funding. But 3 years for any of your trade or professional type tenants, especially in warehousing. You want them to show some longevity. You want to see that they've done some kind of fit out. You want to see that in 3 years time, when the market stabilizes, you can renegotiate that rent and still keep that property quite steady overall. Now, for some of you, I know that during COVID you would have had to give your tenant a discount on the rent, or a deferral or a waiver of the rent, and that has been quite a hit to your cash flow. But just remember that COVID will pass, and that this is temporary, and that in the meantime, your key and the most important thing you got to look at is actually helping your tenant through COVID. It's making sure how they're going to recover, work hand in hand with them as they recover through COVID, help them out with any incentives. If they're struggling with outgoings, don't lay it on top of them. Work out a payment plan. I've helped our clients renegotiate some of the leases, where we extended the leases, where we made a payment plan with the tenants, where we've, even at certain circumstances, although it's not ideal, we've dipped into the bond to actually help to cover off some of the rent, knowing that the tenant will be able to pick that back up again in the next little while. We've helped them out with outgoings. So all of those things, I know that you're going to sustain a loss. In fact, everybody in this market has sustained a loss. The key thing is minimizing your loss. It's not about not having a loss, because everyone's sustaining a loss, but it's about minimizing your loss. And that's really the key about working with your tenant, and that building them up over time. So if you're giving them a 50% off, say in March or April, then and then maybe perhaps look at, if you were in May and June, if they were still struggling, you might have continued that 50% off, and now we're coming out into July, we'll probably put your tenant on 40% off or 35% off, and then slightly easing them back over the next couple of months, 20% off, 10% off, and then easing back into full force towards the end of the year, because we are going to come out of this sometime in September, October, and trading should resume, and then we've got the Christmas period as well. So remember to talk continuously to your tenant. Remember that that this will pass, that you didn't buy commercial property just for today or for a year. You bought commercial property for the long term, for the next 10 or 20 years. So you got to look ahead and see what you can do for now, and also what you can do in the next 2 or 3 years. And really, the one thing you don't want to do right now in this market is sell, because there's heaps of people out there who are cash buyers, who are waiting to pounce on people who are in financial stress, or people who just get a little bit more nervous, a bit more anxious, and all of a sudden they go, okay, well, I got to sell because I'm sustaining a loss in my rentals and I just can't hold it together. Because once you do, and the market picks itself back up, they get a tenant in there, or they help the tenant through, then they've actually gained quite a big windfall from it, and that's what you don't want. So holding it through, work out a strategic plan to help your tenant through this process. Hold on tight. If you can afford, look at some of the bargains on the market, assess your tenant, create good incentives, work hand in hand, because we will get through this COVID thing, and commercial property will come back stronger than ever afterwards, and you'll start producing stellar cash flow moving forward. So I hope this has been helpful. If you enjoyed this, or you want some help through what you're going through at the moment through COVID, please reach out to me at helentarrant.com. Send me a contact us email, or if you want to find out more about commercial property or how that can help you, you can download my ebook. So all you can do is just go over to helentarrant.com. Now, I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. In the meantime, subscribe, hit the bell, and bye for now.